Happy 50 years to Space Mountain. Debuting on January 15th, 1975, this ride has remained an icon of the parks to this very day. Space Mountain resides in Disneyland, Disney World, Disneyland Paris, Hong Kong Disneyland, and it formerly resided at Tokyo Disneyland, but right now is like undergoing maintenance. All the parks had Space Mountain except for Shanghai Disneyland, which had the Tron Cycle instead. Space Mountain is one of the best Disney coasters. Sure, Big Thunder is cool, but Space Mountain is literally in space. It's in a dark room with awesome space music and stars. But what's the story behind all of its excellence? Today, I will dive into not only the story of like how this attraction came to be from, Imagineering, but more importantly, the fictional story that the Imagineers created for the ride itself to celebrate 50 years of it. If you are unaware, Disney rides like the Haunted Mansion, Pirates of the Caribbean, or Caribbean, and Big Thunder Mountain have a fictional narrative behind the rides. Space Mountain also has an interesting story, to say the very least. For this video, we will explore both the main story of Space Mountain and the very special Space Mountain 2, which is the Paris version. We even will touch on Hyperspace Mountain, and we will even go to the lengths of talking about some other Space Mountain overlays you might have forgotten about. So let's dive into this. Our story starts in 1958 when Walt Disney visited Switzerland. Walt had witnessed the Matterhorn mountain itself and wrote on a postcard, "Build this," and sent it to the Imagineers. So the Imagineers built the first ever mountain at a Disney theme park, Matterhorn. The Matterhorn isn't exclusive to Disneyland and was an innovative ride. It was the world's first tubular coaster, meaning that it was the first ever steel coaster. This also was the first thrill ride at Disneyland, and yeah, it was a big hit and is still a big hit to this day. Of course, Walt was pleased with the Matterhorn, but Walt being Walt wanted to push for something new, something extravagant. He looked to the stars and wanted a Matterhorn in space. This time, the ride would be enclosed to give you the effect of being in space in a very dark room. As you know, all you can see is darkness and the very small stars on this ride. At least originally when it opened, it was much darker than it is today. The legendary John Hench came up with the iconic exterior design, which has drawn in park guests year after year and remains to be, one of the more iconic pieces of architecture in the Disney theme parks. It's very, very recognizable and very, very original for Disney. Now, the original plans saw this ride having 4 separate tracks of cars racing around in the mountain. However, technology wasn't really ready for that at the time, so the idea was scrapped. As technology did advance though, the Imagineers sought to bring Walt's dreams to life, and at the brand new Disney World Resort, they did so. Disney World was opened in 1971 and Space Mountain was built for Disney World in 1975. The original Space Mountain was made. Even though Walt wasn't around for it, we know that he definitely would have loved it, and he definitely would love what Space Mountain has become today. Now, later in 1977, Disneyland would have Space Mountain, but it was built in a different way with one single track allowing for a wider car. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that the Space Mountain in Disney World has like 2 tracks, or at the very least it was built like the Matterhorn, which yeah, I guess the Matterhorn did have 2 tracks, and it was a very much so snowmobile type ride. If you still get on it today, it feels like the Matterhorn. I've experienced both Disneyland and Disney Worlds, and honestly I do like the Disney World one more because it does feel like what Walt wanted, which was the Matterhorn in space. Of course the Disneyland one is good and everything, it's just much more smoother and relaxing, and you feel the fresh breath of the air blowing, like all around you, and it feels much more relaxing. While in Orlando, you're met with a very different ride and a very rickety and kind of frightening ride because of how unstable it can feel. It feels exactly like the Matterhorn and doesn't feel like it's been updated really, which is kind of cool. Before we go any further into like the Paris storyline or how that one was made, we need to actually explore the main story for Space Mountain. All parks except for Paris follow one simple story. So strap in and get ready for a space story. Picture yourself walking throughout Tomorrowland in Walt Disney World. You are entering Space Mountain or Starport 75. The story of Space Mountain is one of a journey through space. Space Mountain was Walt's creative idea of space travel. The Imagineers designed each location to be a new space station around the world. Starport 75 is the original location in Florida. TL Space Station 77 is the Disneyland station, and every other location has their own unique port names. Now, the main idea of the ride is to see what traveling across the galaxy would look like in the future. You are boarding a space car that is essentially a train or a highway that will connect you from place to place. The two space mountains in the United States are located in Tomorrowland, which are operated by the League of Planets. The League of Planets is a fictional organization that organizes Astro Orbiter, the Timekeeper, which is no longer there, the Alien Counter, which is also no longer there at Disney World, and of course, Space Mountain itself and the Space Mountain stations that reside in Tomorrowland. Now, the League of Planets was formed when Earth was integrated into the larger universe of intelligent life. The League is meant to promote peace and diplomacy throughout the world. The Astro Orbiter is a sign of that peace, and the People Mover in Florida is in relation to both Astro Orbiter being a beacon of peace, and since it's integrated into a small part of Space Mountain, it is a part of this, but I guess it can promote peace if you want to say that it does. I think it does. It's a very peaceful ride. So sure, it promotes peace since it's related to Astro Orbiter, and of course, it goes through Space Mountain when you see the two astronauts in Florida before you get into the very thrilling parts of the ride. Starport 75 is a special port as it is the original and is a part of the Tomorrowland Chamber of Commerce, which runs a large part of Tomorrowland, primarily in Florida. Now, the Chamber of Commerce is this large association of businesses in Tomorrowland. They are over Aunt Gravity's Galactic Goodies, which is now no longer there, Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger Spin, Merchant of Venus, which is no longer there, the Tomorrowland Light and Power, as well as Tomorrowland Transit Authority. Tomorrowland Light and Power, it's just the Light and Power Company, and the Transit Authority is the more formal way of saying the People Mover, and it's the big thing that is the People Mover itself. It's like the company that kind of developed the Tomorrowland People Mover, or you can call it the Transit Authority, but most people just call it the People Mover because the People Mover sounds a lot nicer, and that's what Walt called it when it was in Disneyland. Now, the Chamber of Commerce did one very, very bad thing. They aligned themselves with XS Tech, which is an evil company that brought us Alien Counter. The XS Tech Corporation is basically Weyland-Yutani from Alien. And I'm sorry if I got that pronunciation wrong, but it's the evil corporation in Alien that sets up the entire crew to go get the eggs. And then, of course, if you've seen Alien, you know the rest of the story. Everything goes really, really bad, and there's a big massacre on the ship. All of this to say that the original story of Space Mountain is one big transportation hub that connects one Space Mountain to many others. This was how Walt saw the future of transportation, and all these companies own or operate this public transit system, which is integrated into the rest of Tomorrowland, creating like a cohesive story. Now, you might be wondering how something like Paris fits in, since it is Tomorrowland 2.0. Fits in a weird way, but also kind of its own individual way. But there's a big story behind it, so let's get into it. The Imagineers wanted to actually create something special and unique and new, which is why we have Discovery Island instead of Tomorrowland. And if you didn't know, Discovery Island is kind of like a leftover idea from Tony Baxter and some, I think, new Frontierland stuff. If I'm not mistaken, in Disneyland, they were going to open up that area that is now Galaxy's Edge way long before and do like a sort of Jules Verne sort of exploration world, like a more steampunk type thing, if I'm not mistaken. I could make an entire video on it. It's a very fascinating land that was just scrapped, but many of those like ideas and everything ended up making its way as Discovery Island instead of Tomorrowland. This land is built on Jules Verne, and in 2005, it went from the French Space Mountain to Space Mountain 2. The only big difference here is how in Space Mountain 1.0 for France, you are launched to the moon via this massive cannon. Now, this was the very first catapult launch system in any ride, which is pretty cool. Now, in Space Mountain 2, you go to the edge of the universe instead of just the moon, which is pretty cool. Now, this is the most intense Space Mountain ride to date. It is the fastest. It has really high speeds, upside down parts, and just a lot of crazy stuff happening at once. But the story of it is a bit odd and confusing. The actual narrative of this is kind of weird, to say the least. The Baltimore Gun Club was a firearm engineering organization from Baltimore, Maryland, located in the United States. The club itself made the concept of Space Mountain after the Civil War as a way to launch vehicles into orbit as if you had shot a bullet from a cannon. The project was overseen by Colonel Impey Barbicane? I hope I said his name right. Impey Barbicane, who helped make the Columbiad cannon that was then put in France's Discoveryland. The club president, Barbicane, also used this entire attraction and this sort of operation as a business known as Blue Moon Mining Company, which would harvest resources in space. This Space Mountain was the first of all of them, as it debuted at the 1899 World's Fair. Of course, when I say it's the first, I mean the first in the canonical story. Which is cool that it got integrated into the World's Fair, since, you know, the World's Fair is a pretty big part of Disney history. Now, before we move on, I do want to say that this is a very weird story to me. There's not like a whole lot of information on the actual storyline. You're kind of just given this. There's not like super big departments there that we're led to believe that are there. It's just kind of straightforward of being like, hey, this guy after the Civil War was like, look at our guns now. Let's manufacture a massive cannon and launch you to the moon, which was based off of a Jules Verne story, which is cool. But if he's in America, why is he giving it to France after the Civil War? Like, I don't exactly understand that part. That part is a little bit strange to me, but there's no like real reason of it. And it's not that like it's a bad thing to give it to France. It's great. It made that part unique, but I would like some more context of why this even happens. And I guess I understand the Civil War timing, and even though, you know, Disney didn't do anything at the 1899 World's Fair, it is cool to say that there was one, even if that's probably fictional. I didn't look that up. Look it up if you want. Is it real? Is it not real? I don't know if the 1899 World's Fair is real or not, but it is cool to tie that in. It makes sense with the Civil War. But it's also kind of bizarre that this firearm engineering organization from Baltimore made this really cool thing that was just inspired by a Jules Verne story about the future, which is weird. But I will say the Blue Moon Mining Company, it's pretty understandable for the time. People trying to mine goods and everything like that makes sense. People are always trying to get natural resources and stuff like that, so that part does make sense, but that only factors into 2.0. I think I guess it could kind of factor into the first, but yeah, let's move on to the other two overlays. Now, you might be wondering, what is the story behind Hyperspace Mountain, the Star Wars overlay that was a big deal, or maybe even the story of Ghost Galaxy, which is their Halloween overlay? As for Hyperspace Mountain, I think it was just a marketing strategy for The Force Awakens, which is cool. I will say the ride itself is actually pretty cool. The first time I got on it, I was blown away. What they do with the screens is kind of cool, but kind of not. But having John Williams' classic Star Wars score like just as this little symphony being blasted there. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. Admiral Akbar giving you these like messages and mission commands. That's great. It feels like you're in Return of the Jedi, fighting the final fight. I will say though, this ride did annoy me a bit because it was there permanently from 2015 to 2017, and I felt like it was there also permanently in 2018, but I guess it wasn't. Unless it was Halloween time, then they put the Halloween thing in it. And looking back, in my opinion, at the time, I enjoyed it way more than Star Tours, because Star Tours kind of had one stagnant update, and there wasn't like a whole lot of variety there whenever I went on Star Tours, so it was cool. Now, the big complaint I did have with this ride is, of course, the screens, because if you've been on Space Mountain, you will know that there was a time before a lot of screen projections. It seems like now there's more and more screen projections on normal Space Mountain, which is iffy. I have mixed feelings because, you know, space is both dark and desolate, and at the same time, like, really beautiful, with all these constellations and the cosmos and everything. But I'm a little bit like mixed up on the screens, but it did serve a cool purpose in this ride. I just think that after Hyperspace Mountain, Disneyland's Space Mountain in particular relied very, very heavily on screen technology, which not the greatest decision in my mind. For Ghost Galaxy, this is a ride born of nightmare fuel, especially if you're 7 years old and you get on this thing. Now, this ride expertly transports you to this really haunted galaxy with a large ghost that terrorizes you. And the ride is fun. It's haunting. It has these ghastly screams and frightening visuals and a really eerie and unnerving score, which is kind of cool. And I didn't expect that Disney would make anything slightly scary at their Halloween event, since, you know, like the Nightmare Before Christmas overlay, that's fun. That's fun. If you love the Nightmare Before Christmas, you're just going to have a lot of fun. Even if you don't, I don't think you're going to think that's scary. But this, they actually try to do something scary with some jump scares, some very creepy visuals and audio cues, and I appreciate it. Now, how does this all fit into the story of Space Mountain itself, you might ask? They put a little bit more effort in there instead of just saying, hey, it's a Star Wars ride now, which, you know, understandable for Space Mountain, especially since it's transport, but here, they do something that I didn't really expect. Now, Bob the Skeleton is the ghost that haunts you as his green storm takes over this planet and the route that you are going to take. So that's it. And I know I just said that it was impressive to me, but honestly, compared to what I would have like thought this story was, it makes sense at the very least. Is it super duper impressive with all these implications to the space station and all these little hidden nods? No, not really, but you know, it makes sense, and it feels like it makes a little bit more sense than Hyperspace Mountain, because you can just see right through hyperspace and know like, oh yeah, that's just a marketing gimmick. But my friends, there is one final bizarre overlay for Space Mountain. There actually might be two, because as I'm thinking about it, I couldn't remember if they did, like, I think they do a Christmas overlay, which, if I'm not mistaken, has like zero implications whatsoever to anything. It's way loosely based. It's arguably loosely based in the one final entry I have here, which is, of course, Rockin' Space Mountain. Now, as I was editing, I came across the Space Mountain in Christmas time, and I have to say, it's really fun. Yes, it has like nothing implying anything to the story. It is just Space Mountain with Christmas festivity, lights, and beautiful music. And the cool thing about this, the Ghost Galaxy that we just talked about, I think is exclusive to Disneyland. I've only seen it done at Disneyland. The Christmas overlay is exclusive to Space Mountain, Magic Kingdom, Walt Disney World. So I think that's really cool. Of course, it's a little bit ridiculous, but also all these overlays are kind of ridiculous, but sometimes you just have to have fun. And listen to some of this music here, because it's really cool. So I know that I'm about to go and criticize Rockin' Space Mountain, which I think is really stupid. I think I think that's stupid because it's so bizarre. At least here, you're having a holiday overlay, which is fun and exciting, and you used some rock and roll versions of Christmas songs, which is really nice and fun. I think everybody could enjoy that. So I'm not super duper critical of this one. Also, you do get to look at the interior of the ride with the lights on, as you can see here in this footage that I've been showing you. There's a lot of just like very bright flashy lights. Yeah, they should probably put a warning up for that. I think it's just really fun. I don't see the harm in a Christmas overlay like this, but as I was saying, I'm going to be very critical of the next one because it's so weird and random. So let's move on to that one, and I hope that you enjoyed this one and my little interruption. And it had the Red Hot Chili Peppers blasting at maximum volume on this ride. Now, the reason for this is our radio station so graciously is going to play the Red Hot Chili Peppers to celebrate rock and roll. I think this ride overlay is the most bizarre thing Disney has probably ever done. Okay, there might be more bizarre things that Disney has done, but for Space Mountain, this makes no sense to me. Even if Metallica or Green Day or even a modern day artist like Olivia Rodrigo were added in here, I'd be confused. I wouldn't want Rockin' Space Mountain. And look, I enjoy those artists. I really do. I enjoy each and every single one of those. The three that I mentioned, not Red Hot Chili Peppers. I'm not a Red Hot Chili Peppers guy, but I don't see the actual reasoning to put them in. I just don't think it fits Space Mountain. Like, what does rock and roll actually have to do with Space Mountain? Sure, it's cool and it's fun, and I feel like at the time that they did it, Rock and Roller Coaster wasn't like super duper new, but I feel like they were trying to give some of that Rock and Roller Coaster energy to Space Mountain, which doesn't really like translate that well. Sure, Rock and Roller Coaster is this super intense, way more intense and way more crazier roller coaster than Space Mountain that's indoors, but that's built around a Hollywood facade, and it's a music studio with Aerosmith, and you got to get to like their party or something. Here it's Space Mountain. Why are we listening to Red Hot Chili Peppers? Why are we listening to Earth music here? I just think it does not fit Space Mountain. But what I will say is, if you did an overlay of space pop or just vintage 80s and 90s hits, because you know there's a lot of sci-fi stuff in the 80s and 90s, then I think certain artists would be excusable, such as Michael Jackson with some really fun visuals, or The Weeknd, who, yes, I understand is a more modern day artist, but at least his music, if you've listened to it, some of it would actually fit a spacey type feel if you used his synths and, you know, like the stuff off of Dawn FM. It would be fun for a special after hours event. I could even get behind Starman by David Bowie playing at an after hours event just for the fun of it, because at least that has a correlation to space, not Red Hot Chili Peppers being blasted and you end the ride with like celebrity flash camera type deal, like the paparazzi. Like, it's just weird. And also at the time, I don't know when this thing started, but I do know it ended in 2007. You had Superstar Limo failing drastically right as California Adventure had opened in 2001. Yeah, I think 2001, which, you know, it got shut down really fast and thankfully was converted to a much more delightful ride being Monsters Inc. So I don't know why they tried to do like the same type of ending here with rock and roll on Space Mountain. I think it's really weird, doesn't really fit the picture. That is the Space Mountain story in both Imagineering and the actual storylines. I will be making a video on Indiana Jones Temple of the Forbidden Eye, since it is now turned 30 whole years old. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. Comment what your favorite Space Mountain is, tell me what your memories of Space Mountain are, and see you in the next. Peace out.